I've always been a fan of horror games. There's something thrilling about playing them in the dark, headphones on, completely immersed in a world designed to terrify you. So, when I stumbled upon a forum post about an obscure indie horror game called Eidolon, I was intrigued. The post claimed it was one of the most terrifying games ever made, but it had been pulled from all platforms shortly after its release. Apparently, it had some issues. Curiosity got the better of me, and after some digging, I found a download link on a sketchy site. The game was cheap, old, and not well known, but the idea of playing something too scary for release was irresistible. I installed it late one night and sat down at my computer, excited for what I hoped would be an unforgettable experience. The game booted up without any fanfare, just a basic title screen with Eidolon written in shaky, pixelated text. No company logo, no opening cinematic, just a menu. I clicked Start, and the game dropped me into a first-person perspective in an abandoned, fog-shrouded city. The graphics were basic but unsettling, with an unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. I expected jump scares or eerie sound effects, but the game was oddly quiet. There were no enemies, no NPCs, no narrative prompts, just an empty world for me to explore. It was weird, but not in a terrifying way. At least not at first. After wandering aimlessly for about 30 minutes, I noticed something strange. The further I explored the city, the more distorted the game world became. Buildings started to warp and twist, textures flickered in and out, and the fog grew denser, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Then, my character's footsteps began to glitch, echoing unnaturally in my headphones. At first, I thought it was just a bug, the kind you'd expect in a cheaply made indie game. But the glitches became more disturbing. As I walked down an alley, I saw something in the distance. A shadowy figure, standing perfectly still. It was barely visible through the fog, but it was there, watching me. I approached the figure, but as I got closer, my screen flickered and the figure vanished. My heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't sure if it was part of the game or just another glitch, but something about it felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be seeing it. The game grew stranger the longer I played. Walls would stretch and shrink, objects would disappear and reappear, and the city itself seemed to be falling apart around me. Then the figure returned. This time it was closer. It stood in the middle of the street, its form barely visible in the fog, but unmistakable. I tried to approach it again, but the game froze for a moment, and the figure disappeared once more. By now, I was too intrigued and terrified to stop playing. The figure began to show up more frequently, always at the edge of my vision, always vanishing before I could get too close. It felt like a presence, something watching me from just outside the boundaries of the game world. Then the real horror began. My character started moving on its own. At first, it was subtle, just slight movements that I didn't initiate, like the character was drifting forward without my input. But soon, it became more pronounced. My character would turn corners, walk down streets, and even backtrack without me touching the keyboard. It was like the game had taken control. I tried to exit the game, but the menu wouldn't open. The only thing I could do was keep playing. That's when the figure appeared again, right in front of me. This time, I could see it clearly. It was humanoid but distorted, with long, stretched limbs and a face that was nothing more than a blank void. It stood there, motionless, blocking my path. I couldn't move. The game had frozen my controls again, forcing me to stare at this horrific figure. Then, the screen flickered, and the figure's head twitched, jerking to the side unnaturally fast. The sound of static filled my headphones, and the game crashed. I sat there in the darkness, my heart racing. I was ready to shut the whole thing down and never touch it again, but curiosity got the better of me. I rebooted the game, hoping it had just been a weird glitch. When the game loaded back up, something had changed. The title screen was the same, but when I hit continue, the city was different. There were no more glitches, no fog, no distortions. Everything was clearer now, but there was a new addition, graffiti scrawled on the walls. It wasn't there before. It was my name. Seeing my own name, written in dripping red letters on the walls of this cursed game, sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't entered my name anywhere. There was no character creation, no profile settings. It wasn't possible for the game to know who I was. I wanted to stop playing, but I couldn't. The game had me. I walked through the city, now eerily quiet, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the emptiness. As I turned a corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was my own face, reflected in a mirror that hadn't been there before, embedded in one of the walls. My character's avatar, standing perfectly still, staring back at me with an expressionless face. And behind me, in the reflection, was the figure. It was closer than ever, its long, distorted arms reaching out toward my character. Before I could react, the screen went black, and a message appeared. "I see you." I yanked the power cord from my computer, my heart pounding in my chest. The screen went dark, and the house was silent, save for the ringing in my ears. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to process what had just happened. It was just a game, right? Just some creepy indie horror game with a few well-placed scares and a lot of glitches. But as I sat there in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of the game. I hadn't seen the figure again, but I felt its presence, like it was still watching me from the shadows. I deleted the game the next morning and threw away the hard drive, but the experience stayed with me. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear the sound of footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I never look back. I know what I'll see. Whatever that game was, it wasn't just code. It was something else. Something alive, something hungry. I was lucky to escape, but I'll never forget the way it felt, knowing that the game was watching me as much as I was playing it. And sometimes, when my screen glitches or my computer acts up, I wonder if Eidolon is still out there, waiting for someone else to play. A few years ago, I got my hands on a state-of-the-art VR headset, one of those immersive next-gen systems that promised a fully interactive experience. I had always been fascinated by virtual reality, especially the potential for horror games. Nothing sounded more terrifying and thrilling than being completely immersed in a world where the horrors felt real. So when I came across a new VR horror game called Echoes in the Dark, I was all in. It was marketed as an AI-generated horror experience, where the game would adapt to your fears and behavior, learning from your reactions to create personalized scares. The idea was that no two playthroughs would be the same. Sounded like a perfect adrenaline rush to me. The game was relatively unknown, not available on mainstream platforms, but I managed to find it on a niche gaming site. As soon as I strapped on the headset and booted up the game, I was hooked. The graphics were impressive, and the atmosphere was intensely immersive. You started off in a dimly lit house, with only a flashlight to guide you. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind made me feel like I was truly there. But what I didn't realize was how real it would start to feel. At first, it was typical horror fare. Walking down eerie hallways, strange noises coming from behind closed doors, shadows shifting at the corner of my vision. But the game quickly escalated. It didn't rely on cheap jump scares. Instead, it built tension in a way that felt personal, like it was targeting my specific fears. About 30 minutes in, I noticed something odd. The game had no visible enemies, but I felt like I was being watched. No matter where I turned, I sensed a presence behind me, just out of sight. Whenever I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing there, but the feeling of being followed grew stronger. Then I started hearing footsteps. At first, they were distant, faint, but as I progressed through the house, they grew louder, closer, like someone or something was stalking me. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up, but I kept playing, thinking it was all part of the game's design. That was until I took off the headset. I had been playing for over an hour, and my nerves were shot. I decided to take a break and pulled off the VR headset. But when I did, something was wrong. I was sitting in my living room, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I could still hear those footsteps, faint but unmistakable, echoing through my apartment. I stood up, my heart racing, and looked around. Nothing. I convinced myself it was just the residual effect of the game, a kind of virtual hangover. I laughed it off, telling myself I'd just been too immersed, and went to grab some water. But as I walked through the hallway, I felt a cold breeze on my neck, despite all the windows being closed. And then, in the dim reflection of the kitchen window, I saw a shadow pass behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. Trying to shake off the unease, I went back to the game. The headset felt heavier now, like putting it on was somehow inviting something back in. But I was determined to finish the game, chalking everything up to my imagination. I started it up again, and things got much worse. This time, when I re-entered the virtual world, it felt different. The game had adapted. The footsteps behind me were louder, more deliberate. The shadows weren't just flickers at the edge of my vision anymore. They were shapes, vaguely human, following me through the house. I could hear breathing behind me, feel cold drafts as I moved through the darkened halls. But the scariest part? I couldn't tell where the game ended and reality began. I take off the headset to find things in my apartment slightly out of place. A chair pushed back from the table, a door slightly ajar that I had closed moments earlier. At first, I thought it was just my frazzled mind playing tricks on me. But then it got more specific. I would hear the game sounds even when the headset was off. The faint hum of static, the creaking of floorboards, the footsteps. They followed me out of the game and into my apartment. I would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving in the hallway, but no matter how much I searched, I never found anything. The last time I played the game, I felt like it was pulling me in, blurring the line between virtual reality and the real world in ways that I couldn't explain. The game world became more distorted. Walls melted, doors led to nowhere, and the house itself seemed to warp around me. But the shadowy figures, they were more real than ever. I could hear their breath, feel their cold presence just inches from me. But whenever I turned, they vanished. At one point, the game wouldn't let me take the headset off. My hands reached up, but they passed through the headset like it wasn't even there. The shadows closed in, surrounding me, their whispering voices filling my ears. I screamed, trying to force myself out of the game, but I was trapped. In desperation, I yanked the cord from my PC, shutting everything down. The screen went black, and the game disappeared. But the room was cold. The presence was still there, lingering in the dark corners of my apartment. I knew then that the game hadn't just adapted, it had followed me out. After that, I threw the headset away. I deleted every trace of echoes in the dark from my computer. But even now, sometimes when I'm sitting in a dark room, I feel those cold drafts, hear those footsteps, and every once in a while, I catch a glimpse of a shadow standing just behind me, waiting. I don't play VR games anymore. Not after that. Not after something from the game came into my world. And I don't think it's ever really left. It all started as a joke, really. I used to be a small-time streamer, mostly playing horror games late at night for a handful of viewers. It wasn't much, but it was fun. People enjoyed watching me scream at jump scares, and I enjoyed the small but loyal community I had built. But then one night, I got a challenge from a regular viewer. "Have you heard of The Forgotten One?" they asked in chat. It was a game I'd never heard of, and I thought I knew every obscure horror game out there. "It's banned on most platforms," they explained. "But if you can stream it and finish the game, you'll go viral." I laughed it off at first, thinking it was just another urban legend. But the viewer insisted, sending me a private link to download the game. The idea of playing something forbidden on stream intrigued me. If it really was some underground horror game that no one could find anymore, it might be the thing that pushed my channel to the next level. So, against my better judgment, I downloaded it. As soon as the file finished, my antivirus flagged it, but I ignored the warning. I convinced myself it was just because the game was old and poorly coded. I started the stream that night, hyped for the ultimate horror challenge, but I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The game booted up with no fanfare, no developer logos, nothing. Just a black screen with pixelated text that read The Forgotten One. The moment I started streaming, my chat exploded with excitement. People loved the idea of me playing a forbidden game, and I couldn't deny that I was curious too. The game started in a first-person perspective, and I found myself in a dark, decaying house. The graphics were dated, but the atmosphere was oppressive. There was no background music, just the sound of my character's footsteps echoing through empty rooms. As I explored, I noticed something unsettling. There were no objectives, no enemies, no story, just silence and shadows. But then things started to happen. At first, it was small. Flickering lights, doors slamming shut behind me. My chat kept telling me it was just the game trying to mess with me, that it was all scripted scares. But the longer I played, the more I realized that something was wrong. The game's glitches seemed too intentional. Whenever I'd glance away from the screen to check chat, I'd notice things out of place when I looked back. A door that had been open was now closed. Objects moved, and then I saw it, the figure, a shadowy, faceless entity standing at the far end of the hallway, watching me. When I tried to approach it, my screen glitched, and the figure disappeared. As the game progressed, it started interacting with the stream. My chat kept saying they saw things I didn't. They'd type things like, "Did you see that face in the corner?" Or "What's with the breathing sound?" But I couldn't hear or see what they were talking about. At first, I thought they were just trying to freak me out. But then the audio glitches started. Every now and then, I'd hear a voice. Not from the game, but from my headset. It was faint, barely above a whisper, but it was there, murmuring words I couldn't make out. My chat didn't hear it, but I knew it wasn't my imagination. I'd paused the game, thinking maybe a tab was open or some audio from another source was leaking through. But no, it was only when I played the Forgotten One that I heard it. As I pushed deeper into the game, I started feeling physically strange. Lightheaded, my skin tingling. The entity in the game, the shadow figure, kept appearing and disappearing, each time closer than before. And then the game changed. Suddenly, my real-life webcam feed appeared on the game screen. My face, in the corner, live-streamed directly into the game itself. My chat exploded with questions. People were freaking out, asking how the game could access my webcam like that. I had no answer. I hadn't given it permission to do that. No game should have been able to take control like that. Then came the final straw. The game started typing in the chat. Messages began to appear that I hadn't written, addressing my viewers by name, taunting them. My hands weren't even on the keyboard. I tried to end the stream. I tried to exit the game, but my computer froze. The game wouldn't let me leave. My heart raced as I frantically clicked the end stream button, but nothing happened. My viewers kept asking if I was okay, but I couldn't respond. I was trapped. The shadow figure appeared again, but this time, it was in the background of my webcam feed, standing just behind me in my real-life room. I turned around, my blood running cold, but nothing was there. The figure was only in the game, or at least that's what I told myself. But the figure moved closer, its faceless head tilting as if it was studying me. The whispers in my headset grew louder. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The game screen started to distort, like a digital virus had infected everything. My entire room, as seen through the webcam, was glitching, the lines between the game and reality blurring. I had to do something drastic. I ripped the power cord from my PC, shutting everything down instantly. The screen went black, and the room fell silent. I sat there, shaking, my hands cold and clammy. I thought it was over. I thought I had escaped. But when I turned my PC back on the next day, the Forgotten One was still installed, despite me never saving the game. The icon was there, waiting, as if daring me to play it again. I didn't touch it. I deleted it immediately and reformatted my entire system. But the worst part? My viewers started messaging me, telling me that the last frame of the stream, before I cut the power, had stayed on their screens long after the stream ended. That frame showed my empty chair, and behind it, the shadow figure standing in my room. I haven't streamed since then. Every time I boot up my computer, I feel like the game is still there, lurking in the background, watching me. Sometimes, I hear faint whispers through my speakers when I'm alone at night. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm convinced that game wasn't just a game. It was something else. And whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting for someone else to challenge it. And I fear that next time, it won't let me leave so easily.